Ruling a massive agrarian empire presents a brutal challenge. A massive military is required for defense, but it possesses the violence to overthrow the state. By the Song dynasty, Chinese imperial statecraft had engineered a structural solution to this threat, a strict top-level division of government power. This blueprint represents the apex of that architecture. Beneath the emperor at the top, a large administrative pillar operates on the left. This left pillar is the Western Office, or the Zhangshusheng. The Zhangshusheng was the palace secretariat, the ultimate authority responsible strictly for the civilian matters of agriculture, law, and taxation. To balance it, a perfectly symmetrical right pillar handles the military. This is the Eastern Office, or the Shumiyuan. The Shumiyuan was the Bureau of Military Affairs, maintaining supreme command over troops. Together, they formed an architecture known as the Two Offices. This dual-axis architecture partitioned state power. By isolating civilian logistics from military command, the system starved rogue generals of the civil resources needed to sustain a coup while ensuring the state remained defended. This highly structured, symmetrical system of control emerged as a reaction to a catastrophic institutional failure rather than a pre-planned design. The Shumiyuan actually began as a dangerously unregulated provisional desk job that almost destroyed the state. To understand how military command functioned across 6 centuries of native Han and foreign conquest dynasties, we have to deconstruct the Shumiyuan and track its evolution from a chaotic palace post into a sprawling bureaucracy. Perfect institutional architecture is rarely designed. It is forged through crisis, survival, and reaction. The origins of the bureau trace back to the Tang dynasty under Emperor Daizong, ruling from 762 to 779, long before the rigid two-offices system existed. Emperor Daizong created the post as a provisional palace secretary to handle ad hoc royal correspondence. The fatal flaw was its informal design. The post lacked bureaucratic boundaries and was occupied entirely by palace eunuchs. Operating right next to the throne, these eunuch secretaries quickly bypassed the formal palace secretariat. They wielded their intimate access to seize the power to dictate royal successions and appoint or dismiss chief ministers at will. This network graph illustrates the bottleneck. The 2 eunuch palace secretaries aligned directly with the 2 commanders of the capital's army of inspired strategy. Together, they formed an untouchable quadrumvirate known as the Four Nobles, or Sigui. They completely severed all pathways between the emperor and the formal state ministers. To break this stranglehold, the subsequent later Liang and later Tang dynasties stripped the eunuchs of this administrative power. They staffed the institution with formal state officials and rebranded the office with the ancient name of the Palace Secretariat, the Shumiyuan. Absolute power without bureaucratic boundaries creates a threat from within the palace walls. The sheer physical proximity to the emperor was a weapon that had to be regulated. During the Song dynasty, spanning from 960 to 1279, the government weaponized administrative hierarchy to cage the military. This is the era where the Shumiyuan was elevated to the status of the Eastern Office, operating with absolute supremacy over the military realm. The chaotic Tang network was replaced by a rigid vertical structure. A military affairs commissioner sat at the apex, dictating orders down through a strict hierarchy of vice commissioners and administrative notaries. The internal mechanics of the bureau were structurally cloned from the traditional 6 ministries. Military logistics were divided into 6 distinct departments, or fang: military, personnel, finance, rights, justice, and works. This division of labor naturally invited bureaucratic expansion. By the early Southern Song period, the institution had spiraled into more than 20 specialized departments before the state consolidated them back down to the traditional 6. Following the loss of Northern Territory in 1127, the Southern Song changed the leadership profile of the bureau. They began appointing civilian officials, rather than generals, to the post of Military Affairs Commissioner. To ensure total ideological control, the civilian counselor-in-chief often held this top military position concurrently, merging the highest civil and military authority into a single civilian administrator. The Song achieved stability not by disarming their generals, but by suffocating them beneath an impenetrable mountain of civilian administrative paperwork and constant oversight. While the Song engineered bureaucracy in the south, the geopolitical reality in the north was defined by the rapidly expanding Khitan and Jurchen empires, who were now actively conquering massive swaths of Chinese territory. These nomadic federations faced a distinct administrative dilemma: how to absorb and manage hundreds of thousands of surrendered Chinese soldiers without diluting their own military traditions and cultural identity. The Liao dynasty, established by the Khitans, solved this by adopting the earlier Five Dynasties Shumi Yuan system to serve as a bureaucratic translation layer. Emperor Shizong innovated on the model by splitting the bureau in two. The northern department managed the native Khitan forces and steppe cavalry, while the southern department administered the surrendered Chinese infantry and walled cities. The subsequent Jin dynasty of the Jurchens struggled with this exact same cultural friction. They constantly renamed the bureau back and forth between the Chinese title of Shumi Yuan and their traditional chief military command, depending entirely on whether the current emperor favored assimilation or traditionalism. This institutional mimicry was vital to maintaining control. The Shumi Yuan provided the precise administrative interface needed for foreign conquerors to rule vast Han populations, utilizing a system the Han subjects already respected and understood. This strategy reached its height during the Yuan dynasty, when the Mongol Empire utilized the Shumi Yuan to administer the largest territorial expanse in Chinese history. To secure this massive apparatus, the Mongols introduced a unique structural quirk to the absolute peak of the bureau's hierarchy. The ultimate title of Military Affairs Commissioner was nominally reserved solely for the imperial heir apparent of the Yuan dynasty. But the operational reality was different. The heir apparent never actually performed the duties. The post was left functionally vacant, while the daily mechanics of the bureau were guided by secondary administrators. By the Yuan period, the Shumi Yuan had become an engine of such massive military leverage that its top title had to be locked away within the imperial bloodline. Leaving the post vacant was the only way to prevent a highly competent minister from using the office to seize the throne. The Mongol Yuan dynasty eventually collapsed under massive uprisings, clearing the path for Zhu Yuanzhang to establish the Ming dynasty in 1368. While Zhu initially relied on temporary bureaus of military affairs to organize his rebellion, his ascension to absolute power rapidly changed his perspective on the institution. In 1361, he completely abolished the term Shumi Yuan, permanently replacing it with the Da Dudu Fu, or Chief Military Command. After 6 centuries, the title of Shumi Yuan had accumulated too much independent institutional weight and historical baggage for a newly minted autocrat to tolerate. What began as a dangerous, unregulated desk job for Tang eunuchs was engineered, century by century, into the supreme military machine of East Asia. It leaves behind a dual legacy. It served as the definitive blueprint for civilian supremacy in the Song, and the essential bridge for military assimilation under the Liao, Jin, and Yuan conquerors. The architectural design of the bureaus built to manage military force provided the stability required for imperial endurance.